Hey, what's up guys? In this video, we're reviewing the Sony 50mm f2.8 macro lens for macro photography. Right after this. What's up guys, and welcome into the video. On this channel, we talk landscape photography, how you can shoot better photographs coming out in the field with us, as well as gear reviews just like this one. So if you're new here, if you've never seen this channel before, consider subscribing below. Now in this video specifically, we're covering the Sony 50mm f2.8 macro lens for macro photography. Now I recently took this lens out to test it for a week straight in Arizona. If you want the video of how I tested this in the Desert Botanical Garden for macro photography, go ahead and click the card that's showing up in the top corner of your screen right now. But onto the review, I want to go over some of the things I liked and didn't like about this lens so that you can know whether it would be a good purchase for you or not. Now, if you want to check this lens out, it's linked below in the video description. But let's get to the pros first. One of the biggest pros about this lens is that you can get really close to your subjects when you're shooting macro photography. That's really good because you want to shoot at that macro 1:1 aspect ratio range. With this lens, you can get within 6.3 inches of your subject and it still maintains that 1:1 aspect ratio quality. That's huge because when you're shooting macro, if you're trying to get that blurred out background, it's really good to get as close as possible to your subject so that you can blur out more of the background. This lens is also super versatile where you can go from f2.8 to f16 and take macro photographs and then take your basic snapshots at f16 as well. Now, let's say you're getting really close to your subject and you don't know if you're within that range. Well, one of the big bonuses that I found on this lens while I was using it in the Desert Botanical Garden shooting cacti was that it comes with a built-in graph on how close you can get to your subjects. So if you're photographing something and you're not really sure, it has a chart on the lens itself that shows you exactly how close you can get to your subject. So like I said, right here with the 1:1 aspect ratio range, you can get within 6.3 inches of your subject. Well, what if you want to shoot with a 1 to 1.4 range? Well, you can get within 6.6 inches of your subject. A 1:2 aspect ratio, you can get within 0.63 feet of your subject, and so on. Studying this chart helps you navigate how close you can get to your subject while still maintaining a good focus for macro photography. I thought that was huge for this lens because it helped me when I was getting close to my subjects knowing what that aspect ratio was going to look like. Was it going to be 1:1, 1:2? What was it going to look like? And it gave me a good idea with this built-in chart on the lens tube itself when I spun the focal ring to get that to extend and get as best focus as I could with my macro shots. This lens is also dust and moisture resistant. Now I know with cameras, a lot of cameras say water resistant, moisture resistant. Well, what is that exactly? Because you don't want to take this out in the rain and douse it and then you can't use your lens or your camera anymore. It basically means that if you're out shooting and it starts to mist, well, you're probably okay until it starts to sprinkle or downpour. So misting is okay, a few sprinkles here and there is fine, but that's pretty much the extent of that. I like the dust resistance just because, especially like I was out in the desert, it's very dry and dusty. You might take this out in some sand dunes. A location like that would require something being dust resistant and require you to be out in the elements a little bit more. With that being said, take some precaution on protecting your gear when you're out in these environments too. Another big help and another huge pro that I found with this lens were all of the built-in features on the side of the lens itself, different options that you can toggle back between. Obviously, there's the autofocus manual focus feature. I usually shoot macro photographs in manual just to get that tack sharp focus on exactly what I want, but it does have the autofocus feature. If you go to like f/16 and you're trying to just shoot an overall scene, the autofocus feature is a good one to use. It also has this feature right here that allows you to adjust your focal distance to get you faster autofocus when you do have the autofocus turned on. You can switch it back and forth between full infinity to 0.3 meters or 0.3 meters to 0.16 meters, meaning those are different focal distances that you can adjust this to, so that when you have the autofocus turned on, your autofocus will say, hey, I only have to focus or find that focal distance between, say, infinity to 0.3 meters, and I know that that focal distance is going to be right in between there, so I don't have to look any further or any closer than that. So I'm just going to look in those few distances and autofocus to that point. It helps you with faster autofocus and enables you to capture some images that you might not be able to capture otherwise if your focus was looking for something to focus to. And lastly, it has this little button on the side, which is your freeze focus option. If you have your focus set to, we'll keep it on infinity to 0.3, say it's focused on that, you can find something that you want to shoot, and when you see the focal distance that you want, you can hold down this button and it traps your focus in that distance so that you can be sure that whatever you're photographing, that it's going to stay on that subject and you're going to end up with a tack sharp photograph. This is really good to give you ease of mind and peace of mind that you're actually photographing and getting right tack sharp focus on everything that you want to shoot. This is a really cool feature, and you don't see it on every single lens that you find. Sony does a really good job at coming up with these unique features on lenses, like this focus freezing button. Now, I also mentioned this a second ago, this lens has a great wide range of photograph capabilities, and that's great because you don't always want to switch out your lens. Let's say you want to shoot macro and then you also, after that, want to shoot a basic overall photograph of like travel photography or something you're doing. Well, this lens can do that. If you're switching back and forth between wide apertures and smaller apertures, you have that range to shoot those type of photographs. Okay, so we've talked about the pros of this lens. Let's get to some of the drawbacks that I found while I was using this so that you can be aware of what you might come into contact with when you start using it in the field. Number one, autofocus is slow. They have tons of features like I showed you, the pros on this lens that are built into the side, the different switches you can toggle, the focus freeze distance button. But the autofocus is so slow on this lens to comparable lenses. I found it extremely difficult to use the autofocus feature. I stayed in manual pretty much the entire time. One example was that I was shooting some wildflowers blooming on some cacti, and a hummingbird came down and started feeding out of one of the flowers. Now, I was in autofocus and I pressed down to find that hummingbird and find the distance, and by the time it took the photo, the hummingbird was gone and the photograph was actually out of focus of the bird itself. After it flew away, I had no other option of photographing a once-in-a-lifetime moment like that. I recommend staying in manual focus with this lens just because the autofocus is so slow with macros that it makes it very difficult to use. Now, you can use autofocus when you're doing some more all-around photography, not necessarily macro, like when you have it in an f/16 or a smaller aperture value. That's going to enable you to shoot those photographs, but in macro specifically, the purpose that this lens was actually made, it's going to be very difficult to use that autofocus feature. I also discovered that the bokeh, or the blurring out of the background in macro photography with this lens, had some very slight discoloration. Now, you can only see this if you're really looking for it, so it's probably not a huge deal if you're just using this for fun or you're not blowing up the prints to a huge size. But there was some slight discoloration that you don't get with some of the more refined, more expensive macro lenses on the market. This one's gonna run you about $450. The ones that have really good bokeh quality are like $800 to $1,000, $1,200. But this lens is probably going to do everything that you want it to. You just need to look and watch for that slight discoloration to maybe adjust for like a lower ISO to reduce some of that. Maybe it's noise coming in the background. Just watch for that if you're purchasing this lens. Like I said, you probably won't even notice it. I only notice it because I'm zooming in, studying every bit of the photograph that this lens takes for the review. I just want to make you guys aware of some of the drawbacks to this lens that I found while I was using it out in the field. So that's the overall review of this lens. Like I said, if you want to watch how I used it in the field, I have a video of that process linked below in the video description. And also, again, I have this lens linked below in the video description if you want to check it out further. It's probably going to run you about $450. Overall, that's a fairly cheap macro lens on a budget, and it's a really good high quality macro lens on a budget as well for your Sony E-mount cameras. This is usually gonna run around with the Sony mirrorless cameras like I use. I used to use the DSLRs. I switched to mirrorless because this lens is small, compact, lightweight, and does a really good job on the go. All right guys, if you like this video and you found it useful, go ahead and smash that like button below, subscribe, or comment below on any questions that you might have. Love to help you out. Until next time, keep shooting, guys.